In 1961, President Kennedy called on all Americans to rise to the challenges of the day. He knew that success depended upon the unity of efforts throughout the federal government and the nation. The Greater Boston Federal Executive Board, one of 28 across the country, fosters communication, coordination, and collaboration with federal, state, and local government agencies. This is your federal government, and I am your host, Diane LeBlanc. Hello, everyone. Today we are featuring the General Services Administration Office of the Inspector General, an independent unit established by law which is responsible for promoting economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and for detecting and preventing fraud, waste, and mismanagement. Our guests today are Brian Miller, who is the Inspector General for the General Services Administration, and Luis Hernandez, who is a Special Agent in charge for the local area. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, Mr. Miller, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
Tell folks a little bit about the mission of the Office of the Inspector General.
The Office of Inspector General, I think you put it very well just a minute ago, is to promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in GSA programs. We also are there to root out fraud, waste, and abuse in federal programs, and we're there to protect taxpayer dollars, to make sure that every taxpayer dollar is spent wisely and efficiently.
So how was the Office of Inspector General established? I mean, why do we have them? What's the legislation that resulted in this?
Well, it had to do with GSA. There were scandals at GSA during the 70s, and in 1978, partly as a result of those scandals, the Congress enacted the Inspector General Act of 1978. And the idea behind that is for federal agencies to have an Inspector General that would act independently of the agency head so that they could look at potential corruption, look at bribes and kickbacks, and do investigations and audits of federal agencies to prevent scandals from occurring in the future.
So it began with the General Services Administration, which we sometimes refer to as GSA.
Yes.
And you are the Inspector General for the GSA. So I guess to provide some context, tell folks a little bit about what the General Services Administration is responsible for as an agency.
Sure. The General Services Administration administers a lot of federal contracts. It is the premier civilian procurement agency. So if there's a federal contract, chances are GSA has touched that federal contract in some way or another. They run schedules to provide services and products. They are also the landlord for federal buildings. So they are involved in leasing buildings, constructing buildings. They are also the custodian of personal property. So any property that the United States owns, GSA has been involved with at some point in its history, including the administration of records at one point.
Okay. So the law was passed in the 70s, and does every federal agency, is every agency required to have an Office of the Inspector General?
Well, not every federal agency. It started in 1978 with about somewhere between 12 and 20 Inspectors General in the 1978 Act. I think it was about 12. GSA, of course, was one of the original IGs, and then Congress has added Inspectors General to various federal agencies. There are still a few that do not have Inspectors General, and from time to time they'll ask my office to do an investigation of events happening at one of these federal agencies, and we're happy to step in and perform that function.
Excellent. Well, we really are very excited that you're here doing our show today so that our viewers can learn more about your office. And you are in Washington, and you are responsible for the entire office. But tell us a little bit about the structure, and I want to get to this gentleman sitting over there so that he can sort of talk about his responsibility, but sort of put the overall structure in context for us.
Okay. We have, at one point we had 330 employees, and they're divided into divisions. We have an audit division, and the audit division conducts audits. They're made up of generally CPAs and auditors in general. We have an investigations division, and they're made up of special agents. They have law enforcement authority, which means they carry guns and can arrest people. Special Agent in Charge Hernandez is a special agent. He's in the investigations division. Within that division, we have field offices. One of our field offices is here in Boston, and Special Agent in Charge Hernandez heads up that office here in Boston.
So, tell us a little bit about your geographic area of responsibility working out of the Boston field office.
Sure. Like you said, we're out of the Boston field office, and we cover all of the New England states from Connecticut on up. Generally, we do that from our office.
And how long have you been the special agent in charge?
Since 2010, here in Boston.
So you talked about the two major components of your mission, the audits and the investigations. Yes. And special agent in charge here, you do investigations.
Correct.
And so here in our region, we have a General Services Administration. Mm-hmm. And they, provide the full range of services that GSAs across the country do. Who would conduct a program audit in a GSA office here in Boston? Would somebody come in from Washington to do that?
Well, we would put together a team, and it could be from Washington, it could be from our office in Kansas City. Okay. It depends on who's available and what resources we have available at the time. And they would come in and do an audit of a contract administered here in the Boston area or of a program.
Okay. Right. So, Luis, you do the criminal investigations.
Yes.
Okay. So, what kind of cases might you be working in New England?
Well, like Mr. Miller mentioned up front, was that the reason why GSA was created, because a lot of public corruption, especially since GSA deals with so much money in contracts. We deal a lot with briberies, kickbacks, fraud schemes, include false statements, false claims. Excuse me.
So your investigations, are they of employees? Are they of contractors? Could they be of both?
They're absolutely both. A majority of our cases, unfortunately, has to do with contractors. We conduct criminal, civil, and administrative cases. And in the criminal venue, we basically we deal a lot with contractors who deceptively obtain contracts from GSA and other government agencies that use GSA as a vehicle to obtain services, and we find that a lot.
There are challenges across the board. We have challenges of getting information quickly. We at times need to get information from contractors, and it's hard to get that information and to do the audit quickly if you're not getting the information. Getting access to electronic databases can be difficult, and we've made a lot of progress in that area, but I've had to work with the administrator directly at times to get that access to our special agents and our auditors. And so those are some of the challenges. Occasionally we'll get a challenge by an official who doesn't want to be audited or investigated. You can imagine nobody wants to be audited or investigated. So we have a lot of different types of challenges. Sometimes the nature of the offense, the nature of the conduct is challenging. We had a case recently of an individual who was involved in, I guess you'd call it hacking, a computer system. Essentially what he did was he held on to his access to various computer programs and databases. And after he was terminated as a contractor, and he went in and found the prices that other people were bidding to get contracts, so he could underbid them. And of course, he was convicted in federal court in Alexandria, Virginia recently. So sometimes we have to use tools, electronic tools, and lots of forensic techniques to identify the conduct and to prove it up in federal court.
Well, in reading your background before you coming here today, actually very impressed. You've really been a leader in that regard. Can you tell us a little bit more about the forensic tools and sort of how you're using technology to help you do your work?
Well, I established a forensic auditing unit about 2 or 3 years ago, and we brought in people with an auditing background, with a computer background, and with investigations background. And in that unit, we'll look at databases, we'll get into various databases, look for irregularities, and try and match them up with potential conduct. And they've found various problems that they've referred. We've made criminal cases sometimes, and other types of investigations that will result in, usually our investigations will result in either a criminal prosecution, a fraud claim in federal court for lots of damages, or administrative action. And so the forensic auditing unit will develop leads, will develop those cases. Sometimes they go in and they'll identify the extent of a crime. We had someone who was embezzling money in one of our regional offices, and our forensic auditing unit went out there right away, and many people at GSA didn't like this, but we said, look, you can't use this computer system right now as a crime scene. You know, it was a different idea for them.
Wow.
And our forensic auditing team went in and they searched the system to see if there were any accomplices, to see the extent that this person had taken advantage of the vulnerability, and to identify the amount of money that was embezzled. And that they did it very quickly and did it very effectively. The person was convicted and sentenced to time in federal prison.
Wow, good.
Yeah.
Good, that's the way it's supposed to work.
It is.
So now, in terms of getting your tips for, you know, the criminal side of things, do you get them from employees? Do you get them from the public? Where do the majority of your tips come from?
Yes.
Yes. Good answer. Yes.
We get them everywhere, and we would like to get more tips. And we've been making an effort to reach out to GSA employees to make sure that they report anything that they see that may not look right, that they report it to our hotline. They come in and talk to one of our special agents or someone from our office. And one reason we have an office here in Boston is we want to be close to where GSA employees are, so they can walk in and say, hey, you know, this doesn't seem right. And then we can look into it, and you know, sometimes it's fine, but sometimes it's an indicator of fraud, and it can be very helpful. So we get leads from all of those places. One of the ideas behind my creating the forensic auditing unit was so that we develop more cases, so that we're looking for those things that don't look right.
Right, okay. So Luis, why don't you tell folks about maybe some of the partnerships you have with either other federal agencies, other law enforcement entities. Who do you work with to, you know, support and help you do your job?
Sure, and to kind of add on a little bit to what Mr. Miller was saying before as well, because of our numbers across the board, a lot of times we depend on other federal agencies and the public to inform us of crime that's happening, and sometimes they're the experts out there, and they know what's illegal and what's not illegal. But we,
do you want to put our fraud hotline out?
Sure. It's fraudnet@gsa.gov is one way to communicate any potential fraud to GSA via email or through our internet site, which is gsaoig.gov, or they can call us at 1-800-424-5210. To answer your question again, we partner with pretty much all the other federal agencies in conducting investigations because, as we mentioned before, GSA as a whole, they service other federal government agencies. So in pretty much every contract that GSA issues, it's probably for another agency. So when there's fraud in that contract, we partner up with those agencies and in that sense double our resources for investigations. So it works out really well. FBI a lot of times and local Department of Defense, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard Investigative Service, and so it's a good partnership with those other agencies, and it works well together because we all know what we do, and it works out in the end for prosecutions.
So now, what about employees who report suspected fraud? Are they protected against repercussions?
They are, and we protect their confidentiality as much as we can, and we will work with them. Sometimes, ultimately, when we do an investigation, it will end up in a trial, a public trial, and sometimes that individual may be the witness that we have to call. So ultimately, we can't protect their confidentiality under some conditions. And we usually sit down and talk with the witness and explain all that. And obviously, the more information they can give us, the better. The more documents they can provide us, the better.
Of course. Now, what percentage of tips actually turn out to be something substantive? Any sense of that, or? Yeah.
We get a lot of hotlines. We get a lot of hotline reports, and we go through them, each report,
and sometimes, something might not look right on the surface, and it's always best to report. And let the professionals follow up. If it's nothing, it's nothing.
Right.
But if it's
usually, if it smells funny, looks funny, it's probably something there. But we'll look into it. We'll screen them, and if there is a criminal violation, we'll continue with the investigation. If it looks like it's a management issue, we'll refer it back to the agency management, and they can handle the situation locally. Or sometimes there isn't really anything else for us to do, so we'll in turn.
And those are very, very important too. Sometimes, they didn't violate any law, but what they did was very questionable, and so it's really a management issue as to what to do with the individual, and we leave it to the management to decide that.
And as federal employees, we're paid with taxpayer dollars, and sometimes it's just a perception, but we just need to be aware and. It's just good to know that people are watching, at least in my opinion.
Good.
Now, in terms of the partnerships, I was reading in your background that you are active with the U.S. Attorney General Financial Enforcement Task Force, Fraud Task Force. What is that about? Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force.
Very good.
There you go.
Very good. And that was a task force started by President Obama. And we continued a lot of the work we were doing on procurement fraud, and I'm active with that. I was active in working with state and local governments with recovery money. If we're looking for fraud in anything to do with recovery money, as well as with procurement. And so I've been up here, and I've worked with the Attorney General's office, with Attorney General Coakley, and with Jim McKinley. And they've started a Stop Fraud Task Force that is working very well. So I've worked with them. I've worked with other states and cities. City of New York, we've done a task force or two, a task force meeting in the City of New York to try and identify ways in which we can work together to identify and stop fraud throughout the federal government and state and local government.
So you're providing leadership for more than just the federal government, which is very nice. I also reading that you actually testify before Congress.
Many times.
And do you do that on a regular basis, or?
Well, yes, I testify on a regular basis and about many things, and testified extensively last year about reports that we do. including the report on the Western Regions Conference, which was a conference that the General Services Administration had in Las Vegas, Nevada. And they paid about $823,000 for the conference. The theme was to, in part, celebrate how they've spent recovery money and to, celebrate the talent of GSA employees. And so they did spend a lot of money. They ignored procurement rules when they obtained services. For example, they liked a certain audiovisual company, and so when a lower bid came in, they shared the bid with the company they liked so that they could underbid the other company, which is a big violation of procurement rules.
Well, I'm glad you brought this conference up. The conference took place out in Las Vegas, and not uncommon for federal agencies to hold conferences in various parts of the country to bring their team of employees, counterparts from, again, across the country for either training purposes or some sort of mission-related purpose. But in this case, I guess maybe, let me take a step back. How was your office prompted to look at this particular conference?
Well, that's a great question, an interesting question too, but let me first say that conferences may be necessary. We need to train federal employees or we're going to have problems in the long term. So training is necessary. The problem is when you get carried away and you waste taxpayer dollars. So this came to us from the deputy administrator who came and asked us to look into this conference. She had heard some things that she thought were questionable, and as we encourage everyone to do, come forward and tell us about it. And we began to investigate it, and we just found problems upon problems upon problems with this conference. They did they had 8 trips to prepare for this conference, and they went to Las Vegas to decide on a hotel 8 times. So they stayed at all the big hotels there, and the Ritz-Carlton and various other places. They catered their meetings there. They spent for the some of the trips they took to prepare for this. They had $48 breakfasts paid for by taxpayer dollars.
Crazy.
So crazy things to prepare for it. While they were out there, they had private in-room parties after the conference, paid for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And at one of the dinners, it was $98 per person. And so they came, they even invited some guests, non-federal employees. And that was way above the amount permitted. And then on top of that, they had parties, in-room parties, where they would invite certain people, so it was invitation only. And on one of the parties, they had 3 big parties. One, they spent $2,700 in catering. They would just order room service. The other one was over $1,900, and then they had other ones for $1,000. But these were just in their room, and they were given 2-story loft suites as part of the package. And so they had these parties in the loft suites. Then when one of the loft suites became vacant, they didn't let another federal employee take the loft suite. They kept it for a party room. So they had one of these parties in the loft suite, which
just
is not a good use of...
Out of control.
Out of control.
Yeah, right.
And so, various things like that. And I'm sure you've heard some of the reports of things that went on there.
And good for the deputy administrator for bringing this to your attention. Now,
Indeed.
from the
She's
time
from the Boston area, Susan Britta.
From the time that it was brought to your attention, how long did it actually take you to do the investigation and turn around a report?
Well, it took a while because there were so many related investigations that came out of that, and we found so many different problems every time we looked into one thing. So, and we also had a concurrent investigation that we had already started on a matter that related to one of the individuals. So we ended up completing that investigation, but we started, it took, let's see, probably a year and a half.
Okay.
And we stopped midway through, and I briefed the administrator at the time, gave her an interim report. And it was actually, we also had a draft report of the other investigation as well. So I gave her the draft report of that and the interim report on this. The other investigation then became final. And then it took us another about 9 months to complete the conference report because there were just so many issues. Even after the report came out, we were still finding issues that were popping up. At some of the congressional testimony I gave, that morning we found that there was, free parking at federal buildings that was being given out to people who were not federal employees, which creates a security issue as well. And so it was related to that, and it came ultimately from information that we started with in that investigation. I like to describe it as, you turn over a rock and you find all sorts of things under there. So you kind of have to look at everything.
So now that report that your office produced, detailing all of these findings, and also detailing recommendations for ensuring that things are fixed and that this doesn't happen in the future. Some very major recommendations which have not only been implemented at the General Services Administration, but in fact are being implemented federal agency-wide. Talk about some of the changes.
Well, the Office of Management and Budget, which coordinates throughout the executive branch of the federal government, they issued guidelines on having conferences and travel. And that was stemmed from our report. The effects of our report reverberated throughout the federal government. And so they have more stringent rules on when you can have a conference, when you can travel. And within GSA, we recommended that they have more central, central authority to have conferences. One of the reasons this conference went out of control was that people in the central office, people in very high positions, didn't have to sign off on anything, and they didn't know how the money was being spent. So it was controlled at a fairly local level, a regional level. And so, the people like the deputy administrator didn't know about it. The head of public building service was involved in it, but he didn't have line item authority. They weren't reporting to him how much was being spent. And so we recommended that they have more central control and supervision of these.
And those changes have all been implemented, correct?
They are being implemented, yes.
Now, if a member of the public wanted to see this report, is it available to the public?
It is. Okay. It's online at gsaig.gov.
Okay.
And look at the report section and you'll find the report.
And are there names in it? Are there details in it? Or has it been
it's a short
screened?
report.
Okay.
We worked very hard to make it very readable and short. And I'd recommend that everyone read it. Generally, when we do reports, we will refer to individuals by title.
Okay. All right. So, I asked you how long you had been with the Office of the Inspector General, but tell me a little bit about your background, Luis, and how you came to the Office of the Inspector General, and what qualified you for this position?
Okay. I've actually been with the General Services Administration Inspector General's office for over 13 years now. Prior to that, I was an investigator with the U.S. Air Force, where I spent over 12 years on active duty. And mostly all of it was being an investigator, in which I traveled throughout the U.S. and overseas for about 10 years.
Okay. Now, what sort of training do you have to take on a regular basis with the other two individuals that you work with to keep you qualified?
To be a federal agent, like most agencies, we have to go through the Federal Law Enforcement Academy. Ours is located in Georgia. A lot of us have a law enforcement background already from previous jobs and criminal criminal justice degrees and other sorts of degrees that really help culminate what we do as investigators too. But we partner up with other agencies as well. We do firearms training, training for duties that we do on a daily basis as well, to keep us sharp and keeping up with the criminals.
Okay. And your boss is Mr. Miller, or?
Ultimately, Mr. Miller. We do have the investigative branch. I do have immediate supervisors that I report to, the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations, and his deputy are located in Washington, D.C., and that's who I report to, which in turn reports to Mr. Miller.
And
Jeff Charrington is
okay.
the
All right, so there's a little bit of an organizational structure, hierarchy, as there is in most federal entities, and you are the Inspector General, you are the big boss, and who is your boss?
Well, I report to the Congress and to the head of the agency, and I do so by issuing reports and testifying before Congress. And ultimately, my boss is the American taxpayer. Okay. I want to make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely, efficiently, and that they're not siphoned off by fraud, waste, or abuse.
Okay. And do you get a performance appraisal?
Well, my performance appraisal is having to report publicly to the Congress, having to report
so it's
to testify.
It's a unique position.
It is a unique.
It really is a unique position.
It really is.
Yeah.
Obviously, having the dual reporting requirement is extremely unique in the federal government, and so that makes it very tricky. The President appointed me. I was confirmed by the Senate. I serve at the pleasure of the President. The President may remove an Inspector General, but he has to state the reasons in writing to both houses of Congress 30 days in advance.
There you go.
So it's really a unique and different type of position.
Now, what did you do before you joined the General Services Administration or became the Inspector General of the General Services Administration?
I worked for the Department of Justice for 15 years, and I was a federal prosecutor during most of that time. So I prosecuted cases involving fraud, terrorism, drugs, guns, you name it, the False Claims Act cases. I worked for the Deputy Attorney General at one point and at various offices within the Department of Justice.
Okay, and you are an attorney?
I am. I'm an attorney, but I'm sure you have you have vices yourself.
We won't hold it against you.
Okay, thank you.
You know, again, in reading over your background, it was very impressive, and I want to get this right. I see it says he was named among those who dared, 30 officials who stood up for our country. A special report of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which is a national advocacy organization. That's a pretty impressive accomplishment. So,
well,
congratulations.
Well, thank you. I've been very fortunate to have great people working with me, like Louis here and many others, so I've been very fortunate in my career.
So, I'm trying to think. What does your office do that the public might not know that you do?
Well, we have a program to recover lost and stolen art.
Okay.
The General Services Administration is the custodian of property belonging to the United States. And we usually think of real property, we think of buildings.
Right.
And that is most of the property they manage. But they also manage what we call personal property. And that's items like paintings and sculptures. And during the 30s and 40s, there was a program, the Works Progress Administration program, where they would pay individuals to work. They paid artists to paint paintings, do sculptures, and to depict American culture at the time. And we have some great paintings and sculptures that kind of freeze a period of history in their artwork.
In 1933, the unemployment rate was as high as 25% in the country's major industrial centers.
I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people.
The New Deal was a series of economic programs begun in the 1930s to give relief to the unemployed and to help the nation recover. These efforts included 4 visual arts programs that employed artists to create paintings, murals, and sculpture for display in public venues.
You know, lots of people were out of work. They started relief programs. And this man, an artist, a mural painter named George Biddle, who'd gone to school with Roosevelt, wrote him and said, "Dear Franklin, why don't we do something for artists as well?" And that launched the whole ball.
The 4 visual art projects were the Public Works of Art Project, the first federal art project, the Section of Fine Arts, which awarded commissions through competitions, the Treasury Relief Art Project, which employed artists to create works for existing federal buildings, and the Works Progress Administration Federal Art Project, the largest of the New Deal art programs. As the official custodian of the works created under these programs, GSA's Fine Arts Program and its Office of Inspector General are partnering with the FBI, museum personnel, and the general public to recover any of these works that have been lost or stolen.
And so when I became IG, I put a lot of effort into recovering these lost and stolen pieces of art. And we've recovered some pretty remarkable pieces of art. We recovered one by an artist named Sloan, who was a famous artist and then got down on his luck and qualified for this program. And he painted a painting that he was paid $35 for. It was recently appraised at $750,000.
Wow.
And we put it up in museums near where the person who turned it in lives, or where they would like it posted. But we want to put it up for all Americans to enjoy. They belong to the United States. We paid for it, and we want Americans to see them.
So that's very interesting. You have this entire now collection of artifacts that you're responsible. Is it your office that's responsible for managing it, or does that go back to GSA?
It goes back to GSA.
To manage?
Yeah, we have a great partnership with the Fine Arts Program at GSA. It's part of the Public Building Service, and we work hand in glove with them. You know, they'll get a lead, or we'll get a lead. Our special agents will go and interview people, and hopefully reclaim the piece of art. We'll determine whether or not it really is WPA art. Fortunately, we have a lot of good records. It seems hard to believe, but from that time period, we have good records, and we can prove that a particular painting belonged to the U.S. We had to go into court once, and we won. It was a famous painting by Andrew Winter, a famous Maine painter. Goals at Monhegan Island. And it was there's a long story to it. It originally hung in the embassy in Costa Rica, and the ambassador loved it. He was long serving, and on his retirement, his staff gave it to him as an unauthorized gift.
There you go.
And
but they didn't know.
They didn't know.
They didn't know.
No, yeah. I mean, most of these are simply misplaced. There's no criminal intent. And we're simply recovering them. And so his granddaughter then put it up for auction in Maine. And we came across it, and so we had to go into federal court and prove title. And so we ultimately got the painting, and you know, many others. You know, some were bought at yard sales for $7, and then it's discovered. There's one where an individual, as a result of seeing our program on Antiques Roadshow, we were interviewed for it, came forward with a painting that he had gotten when he was a child in Berryville, Virginia. As an elementary student, his principal brought him, had them help out in cleaning out an old building that was once a federal building. And the principal said, well, as a reward for your work in cleaning out this office, you know, take whatever you like. And he took a painting.
Wow.
And after seeing our program years later as an adult, he brought it back.
When we recover a piece of artwork, we try to work with the possessor to get them involved in the disposition of it as much as possible. It is the public's painting or public's art. It belongs in the public domain. It doesn't belong in a federal warehouse any more than it belongs on a private collector's wall. So we involve them to try to find a suitable location to display it.
When we reclaim these artworks, we're not doing it to just take them and hide them away in storage. Our goal is to put them back out into the public arena so that people have an opportunity to see them.
Your work, the work of your office, you're saving taxpayer dollars, or you're bringing back taxpayer dollars. So how much money do you save?
Well, we saved about $1 billion last year in money that could be put to better use, and in actual recovery money that was spent in previous years that we have collected this last year. So we have about $300,000 of money that we've collected in. We have about $700,000 in terms of saving money, where we've recommended that GSA does one thing, and they've followed that and they saved the money. So about $1 billion.
And that's just your...
That's just my office. Just my office.
The GSA, Office of Inspector General, not all of the other offices of Inspector General across the federal government. Wow, that's
right.
Impressive.
All of the Inspectors General have recovered $46.3 billion is what they estimated last year. There are 73 federal Inspectors General now, and we differ greatly, but in the Inspector General community, we've recovered that much, which
there you
was...
go. I usually don't make editorial comments, but maybe this isn't a place we should be cutting.
Well, you know, the Government Accountability Office did a study of how much money Inspectors General bring back for money invested. In my office brings back $19 for every dollar invested in my office, and that was a study done by GAO about 2 or 3 years ago.
And at the same time, cleaning things up to make them stronger, better, so that we don't have the same situations going forward.
That's right, and it is a challenge, and it's very difficult sometimes to see the effects of sequestration when we get cut and the agency is still continuing on without that cut.
Right.
And it's...
So, advice for somebody who might watch this and say, I want to do what Luis Hernandez does. What would you tell them?
Well, what I would say is continue your education. Try and get into a law enforcement background, criminal justice degree. Have interest in serving the public. I mean, because really that's what we do. You know, it's about saving the taxpayers' money, and through investigations, it's analytical. It's sometimes long, drawn-out investigations, but it's very rewarding when you see money being brought back to the U.S. Treasury and back to the victims, which a lot of times is the U.S. government.
Good advice.
Excellent advice. You know, if you're in college, I would recommend that you major in criminal justice. You may want to join a law enforcement agency, state police. If you're in the military, maybe CID. Get some experience. Our special agents have law enforcement authority, so they do have arrest authority. They analyze documents. They do a lot of great things, and it's a great job. You do a lot of good things, accomplish a lot. You know, being an Inspector General is a great job too, and I used to say being a federal prosecutor was the best job in the world. Now I say being an IG is the best job.
Yeah.
There you go.
And we get to do a lot of things for the American taxpayer.
And again, that's important, and that's why most people go into public service careers.
Indeed.
Anything that we have not covered that you think our viewers need to know about?
Well, you know, I think it's important to note also that the Inspector Generals are, again, independent of the agency. So a lot of times people associate, you know, the IGs or the investigators as part of the agency, but we want, you know, to ensure that people know that when they do report things to us, we do our investigation independently, and we're impartial about that, and we prosecute these, you know, federally, you know, state and local, and it really it's a good partnership with everybody, the agency themselves, employees, and so forth. So GSA does get involved in a lot, and we want to make sure that the public does know where to contact us and how to contact us, and so we can look into these matters.
I'd like to add that there are a lot of very good people working at GSA who do a great job. and they, they're kind of, they need great recognition too.
Absolutely.
And we try and work with GSA on the front end.
Yep.
We provide fraud awareness briefings.
Sure.
The new administrator and I have done some town hall meetings to encourage GSA employees to come forward and report fraud, waste, and abuse, and anything that may be awry. I've done training on how to use purchase card and where to look for the fraud and red flags. And so we try and do a lot of things up front. We have regular working groups with GSA employees to try and prevent things from going wrong up front. And we've speeded up the time in which we make reports to try and make corrections. In general, I usually at times give advice to leaders in the government and elsewhere. And I generally like to say 3 rules or 3 maxims that I mention, usually following a report on the Western Regions Conference. But the 3 general rules are that you should create a culture of integrity, of adherence to the rules. And when you don't do that, you get slack and people don't follow the rules, and you know, it's like the frog in the boiling water. It gets so bad that, you get a Western Regions Conference. So create a culture of integrity and adherence to the rules. Make sure that as leaders, you need to acknowledge problems and accept responsibilities, admit mistakes.
They happen.
They happen, and it's sometimes, if you have a criminal activity, it's not your fault.
Yeah. Own it.
Own it.
Own it and move forward.
I've made reports on that embezzler, for example. We were getting ready to remove the individual and arrest him, and so I went up and reported to the acting administrator at the time and brought in the chief financial officer and the chief information officer, and simply to report on what's going on, so they knew, and there was this going on. The one would say, well, how could they use the GSA email system to engage in he was procuring gambling and escort services and all sorts of bad things. And so, they'd be pointing and the other one would be saying, well, how could he embezzle? How could he get into the financial system? And I just had to say, well, wait, this isn't about blaming anyone.
That's right.
Criminals exercise their own will and volition, and it happens everywhere. In towns of 12,000, you have a jail because people do criminal things.
There you go.
So the rule is admit your problems. The last maxim or rule is that leaders should support oversight and accountability. One of the problems at the Western Regions, they had a videotape of someone rapping. They gave a prize to the best video, and the video was rapping about never being under OIG investigation. A little ironic in light of the facts.
A lot ironic.
And so support oversight and accountability. So those are the three maxims: create a culture of integrity, admit mistakes, and support oversight.
Very, very good advice, certainly, for federal agencies, for state and local agencies, and for any organization, I would say. Gentlemen, thank you so very much. This was incredibly informative, and thank you both for your federal service.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks for having us, and thank you for your service.
Time went by great. Okay, folks. So I want to thank Inspector General Miller and Special Agent in Charge Hernandez for being with us today and for helping us to better understand the mission of the Office of the Inspector General and their role in protecting the public's interest. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we feature other federal agencies on your federal government.
New Deal Art Recovery Project is ongoing, and art lovers everywhere are helping out.
We now have people across the country who call us and say, oh, I just saw such and such in a gallery. I think it might belong to you. They send us emails about eBay notices on New Deal artwork.
We're seeing that our leads are increasing geometrically. So I believe the successes will be much greater in the future. And I believe that many more pieces of artwork will be returned to the public domain as a result.
They're very valuable paintings. They are part of American history. They're really national treasures. And we want to put them up in museums for all Americans to enjoy and appreciate.
They are a historical record of our past, and they were created for the entire population, for the public of the United States of America.
The bottom line is it is federal property, and if we're not going to care for it now, who's going to care for it?
They're such an important part of our heritage, but it's not the political heritage, it's not the economic heritage, it's the social heritage of who Americans are as a people.
And we're hoping that our efforts to recover all of this work, to put it back out into the public display, not only teaches people about their past, but also allows them to see art as something that's part of their world. And so in that way, it's a continuation of the legacy of the 30s.
There are tens of thousands of pieces of New Deal artwork that are listed as missing. These works represent a strong link to the heritage and history of the United States, and the American public deserves to have them available once more for their enjoyment. If you have information about New Deal works of art that have been missing, call the toll-free number at 800-424-5210 and report it to the Office of Inspector General. You may also find additional information about GSA's Fine Arts program at www.gsa.gov/finearts.